Christmas is coming, and our son and his wife are coming over. You should go back to your parents' house."
My husband of many years said, leaving me stunned. How could he suggest such a thing now? I couldn't believe it. It had been a long time since we'd seen our son and his wife. It turns out this was all a scheme by my husband Kyle. With a mean smirk on his face, I made up my mind too. I'll make sure he regrets this. My name is Emma, a 73-year-old housewife. Kyle, my husband, turned 75 this year. We've been married for 40 years. We have only one child, our son Kevin. He's grown up now, a fine adult. Kevin was the child I had at 42, and Kyle was overjoyed at the birth of his firstborn son. Kyle, being a younger brother himself, always told me about the treatment differences he saw between him and his older brother. I remember now his late parents did seem to care more about his elder brother, often neglecting us as a couple. It was no surprise that Kyle was so affectionate towards Kevin. He was determined to raise him well as his firstborn, enthusiastically coaching him in sports and studies. Kevin tried his best to live up to his father's expectations, but Kyle's overinvolvement was sometimes worrisome. When Kevin went to college in another state, we were happy, but also sad to see him leave the nest. Kyle always said,
"He'll definitely come back to his hometown."
but I thought he wouldn't return. He had finally escaped the clutches of his overbearing father. Once someone tastes freedom, they seldom return. As I predicted, Kevin settled in the state where he attended college, got a job, and married a coworker. She was a local hire, and Kevin often visited her family. It seems he got along well with her parents.
"A down-to-earth, straightforward father-in-law,"
he said. Deep down, Kevin must have been fed up with Kyle's meddling. When Kevin introduced his girlfriend, intending to marry her, Kyle didn't welcome her at all. He probably thought Kevin would return home if she wasn't in the picture. Initially, there was an attitude of opposition to the marriage, and Kevin often contacted me saying,
"Please, somehow, convince Dad."
After many complaints, Kyle eventually agreed, due to his affection for Kevin. I always thought he should have accepted her from the beginning. That's so typical of Kyle, to complain about everything. Kevin's wife, Evan, is a wonderful woman. When we met her at Christmas, Kyle quickly grew fond of her, forgetting his earlier opposition. He started visiting our son and his wife, leaving me behind. I once asked to join, but Kyle refused. He probably didn't want me there because Kevin and his wife would talk more to me. When he goes alone, they focus on him. After my persistent requests, Kyle secretly stayed over at their place. I was making dinner, waiting for Kyle's return, when I got a call from Kevin, which surprised me. I never imagined he would go there secretly. I guess Kyle still can't let go of his son. They don't have children yet. I worry about what will happen if they do. If there's a disagreement over parenting or education, it could lead to trouble. I must somehow keep Kyle away from them before grandchildren arrive. That's what I've resolved to do. Ever since we got married, I had only one dream. That was to own our own home. As a working couple, we could have fulfilled that dream, but we never did. And we're still living in an apartment. It's not bad, but I still wish we had our own home. We gave up on building a house due to financial issues. Since marrying Kyle, I have been saving diligently for a house. Just as I was considering moving forward with our dream home, an incident occurred. One day, I updated the bank book for our house savings and was shocked beyond belief. The balance had dwindled to just $12. The shock of that moment still haunts me. It's a memory I wish I could forget. I wanted to rush to the police, but first I decided to contact Kyle. He nonchalantly said,
"I used it to pay off debts."
I was speechless, only able to muster a "what?" I didn't even know Kyle had debts. Let's assume he had discussed these debts with me. If he had just said,
"I want to use the home funds to pay off my debts,"
I wouldn't have flatly refused, but his casual use of the savings as if it was his own money infuriated me. How could you do this? We always talked about owning a home since we got married. Why would you act so selfishly? I lashed out in anger. To my astonishment, Kyle became defiant. Instead of apologizing, he started shouting at me. He shouted,
I'm the head of this family. My word is law. And what I do sets the direction for our home. Don't you dare question me.
I was stunned by Kyle's twisted thinking. Being a younger brother, oppressed under an elder sibling, had distorted his personality. I regret not realizing this before our marriage. And so my dream of owning a home was crushed. Continuing to live in the apartment wasn't my choice. I feared starting to save again only to have it taken away. Kyle's debts were due to gambling. He must have paid off all his borrowed money at once. After that, there were no more talks of debts. Since the debt incident, Kyle seemed to have become more brazen. He started to assert his dominance in the household at every opportunity. I had always respected Kyle, but his increasing demands were becoming troublesome. Now retired, Kyle spends most of his time at home, obviously bored. His frequent visits to Kevin's home stemmed from his idleness. I didn't want him to fall back into gambling out of boredom. Perhaps allowing him to visit our son and his wife is a lesser evil. However, I worry about him being a burden to them. Amidst these concerns, Kyle said something unbelievable.
Kevin and Evan are coming for Christmas. You should go back to your parents' house.
He blurted this out at breakfast, leaving me in shock. Kyle seemed amused by my reaction, peering into my face with a laugh.
Huh? Didn't you hear me? I said go back to your parents' house.
Why should I go back when Kevin and his wife are coming here? My parents' house is in the countryside, about an hour and a half away from here. My parents have passed away, and my sister, who is married, is now taking care of the family home. Kyle's suggestion that he wants to spend time alone with our son and his wife left me dumbfounded. I was shocked to realize he didn't count me as part of the family.
You barely see Kevin and his wife, right? It'll be awkward for Evan and a hassle for Kevin if his meddlesome mother-in-law is around.
Kyle was using his absurd reasoning to drive me out of our house. Perhaps he's worried I might inadvertently reveal his gambling and debts. I couldn't believe how selfish he was.
One more thing, don't bother coming back. If Kevin and his wife end up living with me, I won't need you anymore.
With that single sentence, I was completely enraged. There are some things that can't be forgiven, even after years of marriage, and Kyle had just crossed that line. Understood. I'll return to my parents' home. If Kevin and his family are moving in, they won't need my stuff. I'll make sure to clear it out when I leave. I said this calmly, continuing to sip my soup, as if nothing had happened. Kyle replied, sounding slightly unconvinced.
All right, make sure you do that.
He probably expected me to react more angrily or burst into tears, but I'm not that kind of woman. Sorry to disappoint. I'll start preparing to leave soon, as you wish. After clearing the table, I went to my room and immediately contacted a service company. I was determined to take thorough action. I could hear Kyle's voice on the phone from the living room, carrying all the way to the hallway. He seemed to be in a good mood, likely talking to Kevin.
Come back any time,
he was saying smugly. Hearing him add,
I've gotten rid of the nuisance,
infuriated me further. If that's how he wants to play, I won't hold back. I'll be organizing my things before I leave, so don't be surprised when the company arrives. I called out from the living room entrance. Kyle responded nonchalantly.
Yeah.
Right at 10 a.m., the company I had arranged showed up. Everything I bought, I'm taking with me, I announced. I directed the purchase and waste collection companies accordingly. Anything of value was sold, and the rest was disposed of. My few belongings I entrusted to a moving company.
What the heck is going on?
Kyle panicked as he saw the workers arriving. It must have been a shock to him. Furniture, appliances, everything was being carried out. Even the Italian sofa that Kyle had been lounging on was quickly removed by the purchase company. They offered a good price, which I immediately accepted. The brand new TV was also taken away. "I own everything I bought, so I'm clearing it all out," I stated. Kyle's complexion changed at my words. It seemed he finally realized what I was doing, but it was too late. The refrigerator, air conditioner, microwave, dining set, all bought with the money I earned. When everything planned was removed, the apartment was almost empty. I had always earned more than Kyle.
"How can I live like this? It's embarrassing with Kevin coming back. Put everything back right now."
It sounded like a final act of bravado. He was ordering me around, his face ashen just like always. It was almost comical, seeing him try to be tough with a pale, sweaty face. "Don't be ridiculous. You're the one who told me to go back to my parents. I'm just settling my affairs before I leave." When all the companies had left, the apartment was nearly bare. I felt a strange sense of relief, as if I had thrown away all my memories. "Good luck. It'll be great if Kevin and his family decide to live with you." I left those words with Kyle, standing frozen, and departed the apartment we had lived in for so long. My sister Emily and her husband warmly welcomed me back home. My belongings were already placed in my old room. "I'll be staying for a while," Emily kindly said. "You can stay for as long as you need." Feeling a wave of relief, I felt all the tension leaving my body. I was surprised at how tense I had been. During dinner with my sister and her husband, I shared everything that had happened. I told them about Kyle's debts, how his skewed personality had worsened over the years, and how he had told me to leave because Kevin and his wife were coming for Christmas. Emily's face turned red with anger on my behalf, which lightened my heart. I've been thinking of getting a divorce. It feels a bit embarrassing at this age, though. I shared my long-considered thoughts. "That's not unusual at all. Divorce in later years happens. Better sooner than later. Let's get it done quickly," Emily said, more enraged than I was. But she was right. There's no point in enduring forever. I'd rather be free for the remainder of my life. First, I had to talk to Kevin about everything. Thinking this, I called Kevin. Feeling somewhat guilty because Kyle often calls him, I rarely initiate calls to Kevin myself. Perhaps surprised by the rarity, Kevin answered the phone after just one ring.
"Mom, I heard you left Dad."
That was the first thing he said. It seems Kyle had called Kevin before me. He apparently told Kevin that I left on my own because I was upset about him and his wife coming for Christmas. He seemed indignant about my supposedly selfish departure. Again, he's telling stories that only suit him. I sighed in exasperation. I told Kevin the whole story. I had considered keeping quiet since it's all in the past, but I also shared about the debt incident. The start of all these issues was that debt fiasco. I was worried that hiding it would prevent my true feelings from being fully understood.
"I understand, Mom. I'm sorry for not realizing what you've been going through."
Kevin apologized, sounding genuinely remorseful. Kyle apparently badmouthed me every time he visited our son and his wife's house. He even told Evan that I didn't like her, constantly complaining to the point of exasperation. Kyle had twisted the story to make it seem like I was the one who opposed their marriage. He had painted me as a monstrous mother-in-law. Would any wife want to visit her husband's family if such a mother-in-law were there? The reason my son and his wife hadn't been close to home was due to Kyle's lies. Kevin, who had never imagined his father would tell such lies, seems to have taken everything at face value. He told me he was prepared to confront me to protect his wife. He even planned to come home this Christmas for that purpose. I also shared with Kevin that I was considering divorce. There was a prolonged silence, perhaps from shock.
"Do what you think is best, Mom,"
Kevin said quietly after the silence. At that moment, for reasons I couldn't understand, I started to cry uncontrollably. It felt as if all the things I had endured and were suppressed were suddenly overflowing in tears. Even though it was over the phone, Kevin noticed I was crying, and his voice became tinged with tears too.
"Mom, No matter what, Dad is still my dad. I always hoped you two would get along. But if it's impossible, it's impossible,"
Kevin said, to which I could only nod in agreement. When my son and his wife returned for Christmas, I went back to the apartment once. It appeared they had cleaned the place, and it was neatly arranged with only essential new appliances, probably provided by Kevin and his wife.
"Why did you come back?"
Kyle shouted upon seeing me. I think the old me would have been scared by his shouting, but the person I am today isn't frightened or shaken by such loud voices anymore. I glared back at Kyle as he yelled at me and handed him the divorce papers. "Please fill this in. With this, we'll be officially divorced. I'm leaving." I had already completed my part. Now it was just Kyle's signature that was needed. He stared at the divorce papers I handed him. "I'll leave as soon as you sign. Hurry up, please." When I urged him to hurry, Kyle reluctantly started writing with a ballpoint pen. While writing, he looked up at me several times with a resentful gaze. His petulant attitude was infuriating to me. Once I confirmed Kyle had finished signing, I quickly took the divorce papers. I didn't want any trouble if he threw a tantrum and tore them up. After confirming his signature, I placed the divorce papers into my bag.
"There's no property to divide, so don't even think about it,"
Kyle blurted out, to which I almost laughed. "I know there's no property. You used it all up, didn't you?"
"If you're satisfied, that's fine. It would be trouble if you demanded money,"
Kyle retorted, trying to maintain his dignity. His attempt to assert authority after incurring debts through gambling seemed pathetic to me. I decided to drop a final bombshell on Kyle. "I think it'll be hard to keep living in this apartment. The rent is $1.6K, and that's not affordable on a pension, is it? You didn't know I was paying it with my father's inheritance, did you?" Kyle seemed to have completely forgotten about the apartment's rent. I could have used my father's inheritance to build a house, but that was after the debt incident. I didn't want to use my father's inheritance to build a home to live in with Kyle. I had a conviction that a true home should be built with money saved together as a couple.
"If I had that money, my debts would be nothing. You're just being stingy. If I had that money, I wouldn't have gotten into debt,"
Kyle defiantly exclaimed, almost making me laugh. I couldn't help but think how well he could speak as if his actions never happened. The debts were created through gambling, yet what did he mean by his words? It's as if he was suggesting that if he had gambled with my father's inheritance, he would have won. Such a ridiculous notion. Don't say such foolish things. Your debts were due to your own gambling, right? Even after using the home funds. Are there still debts? Feeling somewhat uneasy, I asked him. Suddenly, Kyle started to falter in his response. It became certain that there were still debts. I had sensed that he was gambling in secret, but I was appalled to realize he was still borrowing money for gambling. I decided it was time to divorce quickly. I stood up and hurried towards the entrance. Kevin and his wife, who had been silently observing my interaction with Kyle, followed me to the door. As I was putting on my shoes, Kevin asked me to leave the future matters to him. I looked at Kevin's face. He was smiling slightly, but his eyes were not.
"It's unfortunate, but it can't be helped. I'm thinking of putting Dad in a retirement home soon. It will keep him away from gambling, and he might even make some friends,"
Kevin said as we were leaving. He intended to vacate the apartment quickly. I was a bit surprised when I thought Kevin and his wife would start living together. The turn of events was completely opposite of what I had imagined. "I thought you were going to start living with Dad," I said, surprised. Kevin responded clearly.
"What? No way. Evan doesn't like him either. After finally escaping his over-involvement, living together now is impossible."
Kevin said this with a wry smile. Indeed, that's exactly right. If I were Kevin, living with such a father would be absolutely impossible. Especially after experiencing freedom, it would be even more so. Ultimately, Kyle ended up being betrayed and abandoned by his own son. There's a difference between loving a child and being overbearing. Kyle didn't realize this until it was too late. I wondered how Kyle would react when he found out he was being put in a retirement home. I felt a bit sorry for him, but I decided it was his own doing. After that, I filed the divorce papers and officially divorced Kyle. There were no assets to divide, so there was no dispute. The day after the divorce was finalized, debt collectors apparently came to the apartment. Thankfully, Kevin and his wife were still there and managed to handle the situation. Kevin persuaded Kyle that it would be better to leave the apartment as soon as possible and start living in a new place. He placed Kyle in a beautiful retirement home, a bit far away, but with a view of the sea. I hoped Kyle would spend his remaining years there peacefully. Initially, he complained about going, but Evan persuaded and took him. She might have held a grudge against him for opposing their marriage. I worried about the financial aspect of Kevin putting him in an expensive retirement home.
Don't worry about the money. It's better to have fewer problems in a good, distant retirement home than a cheaper, nearby one.
Kevin explained. I understood his reasoning. Kyle, if placed in a regular, nearby retirement home, would probably complain and frequently call Kevin and his wife. By placing Kyle in a well-equipped, distant retirement home and ensuring that any issues would be handled by the staff, the chances of face-to-face encounters and nuisances are reduced. Kevin seems quite the strategist. For Kyle, not being able to see his beloved son Kevin must be a painful and hard experience. It might serve as an opportunity for him to reflect on his past actions a little. Because of Kyle, I too had been unable to see my son and his wife for a long time. It's only fair Kyle experiences that same pain. This is what they mean by poetic justice. After divorcing Kyle, I returned to live with my sister and her husband at our childhood home. I had thought of finding a small apartment and moving out, but my sister and her husband seemed to want me to stay. They don't have children. And the large house in the countryside felt lonely with just the two of them. My sister's husband is a very gentle and kind person. He treats me like a real sister. In place of my sister and her husband who run a farm, I took on all the household chores. Suddenly, I began to find a sense of fulfillment in doing housework. It had been so long since I had been thanked for doing chores. Making new discoveries, I stepped into a new phase of my